I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the lobby and saw Jennifer from reception staring at her computer screen like it had just told her the building was on fire. She wouldn't look up, wouldn't even acknowledge me walking past her desk where I'd said good morning every day for the past 8 years. That's when my phone buzzed with an Outlook notification. Subject line, Urgent Performance Review, 9:15 a.m., Conference Room 4C, all caps, no signature, sent at 8:47 a.m. on a Friday. The name's Christopher Reed, by the way. Chris to most people. I'm 47, been with Pinnacle Financial for 15 years, and I just finished my 12th consecutive quarter of growth. More importantly, I was exactly 23 hours away from the biggest equity bonus of my career, $4 million that would finally let me pay off the mortgage on Sarah's dream house and maybe start thinking about retirement without eating cat food in my golden years. But that Friday morning, walking through those marble-floored hallways, I felt that familiar corporate chill. You know the one. It's the same feeling you get when you realize the meeting you weren't invited to was actually about you. The same feeling I'd been getting ever since Nicholas Porter took over as CEO 8 months ago. Nicholas. God, where do I even start with that kid? I'd known him since he was fresh out of Wharton, full of buzzwords and theoretical knowledge but zero practical experience. His father, Robert Porter Sr., had built this company from nothing back in the 80s. Good man, old school, understood that business was about relationships and trust. But Nicholas, he seemed determined to prove that MBA programs could replace 30 years of hard-won experience. I'd actually mentored the kid when he first arrived 3 years ago. Taught him how to read the subtleties in client negotiations, showed him which regulatory landmines to avoid, even covered for him when he nearly torpedoed the Henderson acquisition by misreading a compliance clause. I genuinely thought I was helping him grow into the role. Looking back now, I realize I was just training my own replacement. I took the long way to the conference room, not because I was scared, but because I needed to read the room. 15 years in this business teaches you to watch for the tells. Catherine Morrison's office door was cracked open, and I could hear her whispering to someone with that fake sympathy voice she uses when she's about to ruin someone's day. Same tone she used when she told Steve from accounting that his role had evolved beyond his scope. Corporate speak, for we're replacing you with someone half your age who'll work for peanuts. The hallway felt different that morning. Colleagues I'd known for years suddenly found their shoes fascinating when I passed by. Richard from M&A actually ducked into the copy room when he saw me coming. These were people I'd worked late nights with, people whose kids I'd sent graduation gifts to, people who knew I'd been carrying this division on my back for the better part of a decade. That's when I knew for certain what was about to happen. I stopped by my office first. 23rd floor, corner office with a view of the harbor that Sarah had always joked was worth the 70-hour weeks. Opened the locked drawer and pulled out my contract file. 8 pages of legal language, 3 of which I'd personally renegotiated after my promotion 18 months ago. I flipped directly to Clause 11C and read it one more time. Here's what most people don't understand about corporate contracts. The real protection isn't in the salary or the title. It's in the fine print that nobody bothers to read. I'd spent weeks crafting that clause during my last renegotiation, had it reviewed by 3 different attorneys, and made sure every initial and signature was properly documented. Because in this business, especially when you're north of 45, you're only as safe as your paperwork. The clause was still there, clear as daylight. My insurance policy against exactly this kind of amateur hour power play. Language that I'd specifically written to protect against what the legal world calls constructive dismissal, firing someone to avoid paying contractual obligations. Nicholas had actually laughed when I'd insisted on that clause during our renegotiation meeting. "Come on, Chris," he'd said. "Only lawyers read the fine print." He'd initialed every page without even pretending to understand what he was signing. Catherine had countersigned the implementation memo, and I had copies of everything backed up in 3 separate locations with full metadata. Because here's the thing about working for a family business when you're not family. You learn to document everything. Conference room 4C had its blinds drawn when I arrived. Nicholas was sitting there with Catherine and 2 HR representatives who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. No laptops, no performance reviews, no documentation of any kind, just the corporate execution squad waiting for their cue. The irony wasn't lost on me. This same conference room where I'd closed the Morrison deal 2 years ago, bringing in $40 million in revenue. The same room where I'd saved the company from a disastrous regulatory violation that would have cost them twice what they were about to try to steal from me. "Chris," Nicholas said, trying to sound sympathetic but failing to hide the smugness in his voice. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I always make time for my team." Nobody smiled. He gestured to the empty chair across from them. I didn't sit. The moment had arrived. "I'll get right to it," Nicholas continued, his voice carrying that practiced executive tone he'd been perfecting since business school. "We're restructuring the division, and unfortunately your position is being eliminated effective immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. 15 years of 6 a.m. client calls, weekend deal, negotiations, and missed family dinners reduced to one sentence. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear, but recognition. This was exactly what I'd been preparing for since Nicholas started making his modernization speeches. "I see," I said calmly. "May I ask about the restructuring timeline?" Catherine jumped in before Nicholas could answer. "The decision is final. It's been approved by leadership." Leadership. That was rich, coming from someone who'd spent the last 8 months watching Nicholas systematically alienate our biggest clients with his disruptive approaches. Just last month, I'd had to personally smooth things over with the Hartman Group after Nicholas suggested they leverage synergistic blockchain solutions for their pension fund management. These people managed $2 billion in retiree money. They didn't want to hear about cryptocurrency from a 29-year-old who'd never managed anything bigger than his trust fund. "Chris," Nicholas leaned forward, and I caught something in his expression that made my blood pressure spike. Satisfaction. The little bastard was enjoying this. "I want you to know this isn't personal. It's about bringing fresh energy to senior positions, aligning our leadership with contemporary market dynamics." Fresh energy. Contemporary market dynamics. The same buzzwords he'd been throwing around since he convinced his father to let him modernize the company. What he really meant was clearing out anyone old enough to remember when competence mattered more than connections. "I understand," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about being dismissed by someone I'd personally trained, someone who wouldn't know a regulatory compliance issue from a coffee order without my guidance. "We'll need your badge and any company property," Catherine said, sliding a termination letter across the polished table. Her hands were shaking slightly. Good. At least someone in this room understood they were playing with fire. I reached for the badge clipped to my jacket, the same one I'd swiped thousands of times over the years. Thought about all the late nights spent in this building, all the crises I'd navigated, all the revenue I'd generated. The Henderson acquisition alone had netted the company $40 million. The Morrison deal, $55 million. The regulatory save from 2019 that kept us from a $20 million penalty. "Of course," I said, setting the badge on the table with a soft click. Just like that, I'm no longer Senior VP of Strategic Development at Pinnacle Financial. Nicholas nodded, already reaching for his phone like this was just another item to check off his Friday to-do list. But what he didn't realize, what none of them understood, was that firing me 23 hours before my equity bonus vested hadn't saved them $4 million. It had triggered something much more expensive. They'd find out soon enough. I picked up the termination letter, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. "Is there anything else?" "Security will escort you out," Catherine said, avoiding eye contact. She was already reaching for her phone, probably calling building security to make sure I didn't cause a scene, as if I'd spent 15 years building my professional reputation just to throw it away on a dramatic exit. "That won't be necessary," I said. "I know the way." I walked out of conference room 4C like I was heading to lunch. No drama, no threats, no emotional outburst. Just a 47-year-old man who'd been systematically betrayed by people he'd trusted and trained. Behind me, I could hear Catherine's relieved exhale and Nicholas already talking about moving forward with the restructuring timeline. The elevator ride to my office felt longer than usual. 23rd floor, corner office, view of the harbor. Sarah had always joked that the view was compensation for all the family dinners I'd missed, all the weekend calls I'd taken, all the vacations we'd postponed because of critical deals. Now I was looking at it for the last time. And all I could think about was how Nicholas had just made the most expensive mistake of his privileged life. I packed methodically. Personal photos, the bottle of bourbon clients had given me after closing difficult deals, the small cactus Sarah had bought to brighten up your cave. Everything else, the awards, the deal tombstones, the framed articles about successful transactions, I left behind. Let them clean up their own mess. But before I left, I made one stop. The locked drawer where I kept my contract file. I pulled out the folder one more time and opened it to page 4, clause 11C. Read the language I'd crafted so carefully 18 months ago, the protection I'd insisted on despite Nicholas's dismissive laughter. In the event of involuntary termination without documented cause occurring within 24 hours of scheduled equity vesting, employee shall be entitled to immediate acceleration of all unvested benefits, calculated at current market value, plus compensatory damages equal to 150% of affected equity value, plus continuation of benefits as specified in Section 7. The clause went on for another 3 paragraphs, each word carefully chosen, each provision meticulously crafted to protect against exactly what had just happened. I'd even included language about constructive dismissal and bad faith termination, concepts that would make Pinnacle's lawyers very uncomfortable once they understood what they were dealing with. Nicholas thought he was being clever, cutting me loose before the bonus vested. But Clause 11C didn't just cover the moment of vesting. It protected against any termination designed to avoid contractual obligations. And thanks to the metadata on every email, every meeting transcript, every implementation memo, I could prove beyond doubt that this firing was calculated to steal my earned compensation. The beauty of it was in its simplicity. They'd initialed every page. Catherine had countersigned the implementation memo. I had documentation of every approval, every meeting where the terms were discussed and agreed upon. Nicholas had even joked about it during the final signing. Only lawyers read the fine print, right, Chris? Wrong, Nicholas. Dead wrong. I closed the folder and headed for the elevator. Instead of heading to the parking garage, I took the elevator up to legal and compliance on the 45th floor. I'd spent enough time up there during our major deals to know exactly who still had integrity behind their corporate facade. The hallways smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee, the scent of overtime and weekend work that I'd grown familiar with over the years. Andrew Mitchell was in his office when I knocked, hunched over a stack of regulatory filings that probably should have been submitted yesterday. Andy had been associate counsel for 6 years, sharp as a razor, and one of the few people in the building who actually read contracts before signing them. More importantly, I'd mentored him through his first few M&A deals, taught him how to spot the landmines that inexperienced executives love to step on. Chris? He looked up, startled. Didn't you just get terminated, effective immediately? No cause cited, no documentation. I handed him my contract folder. Page 4, Clause 11C. I think you'll find it interesting reading. Andy opened the folder with the careful attention he brought to everything. I watched his face as he read through the clause, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to concentration to something approaching shock. He read it once, then again more slowly, his legal training kicking in as he absorbed the implications. Chris, he said finally, looking up at me with newfound respect, this clause is absolutely bulletproof. If they terminated you within 24 hours of equity vesting without documented cause, they owe you the full bonus plus accelerated vesting plus compensatory damages. That's my reading as well. And they initialed every page of this? Nicholas personally approved the language? I pulled out a second folder, my backup documentation, meeting transcripts from the negotiation sessions, email confirmations, implementation memos signed by both Nicholas and Catherine. Everything time-stamped and backed up in 3 separate locations. Andy leaned back in his chair, a soft whistle escaping his lips. They thought they were being clever, cutting you loose before the bonus vested to save $4 million. But this clause activates because of the termination, not despite it. The language is crystal clear. Any involuntary termination designed to avoid contractual obligations triggers full acceleration. Plus damages. Plus damages. He was already reaching for his phone. Chris, I need to escalate this to Jennifer Hayes immediately. She needs to see this before anyone tries to bury it or claim ignorance. Jennifer Hayes was Pinnacle's lead counsel, a woman who'd survived 3 CEOs and countless corporate restructurings by being smarter than everyone else in the room. If anyone could make Nicholas understand the magnitude of his mistake, it was her. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Jennifer's corner office, watching her read through my contract with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining x-rays. The office was immaculate. Law books arranged by topic, not a paper out of place. Diplomas from Harvard Law and Columbia displayed with understated pride. This was someone who understood that details mattered, that precision was everything in legal warfare. She didn't speak for a full 5 minutes, just read, made notes, and occasionally shook her head. Finally, she set down the contract and looked at me with the kind of professional respect I hadn't felt in months. "Christopher," she said, "this is one of the most comprehensive protection clauses I've seen in 20 years of corporate law. Every potential loophole is closed, every contingency is covered, the language is precise, the triggers are clear, and the documentation is flawless." I had good teachers, I said, thinking of the attorneys who'd helped me craft it during those late-night sessions 18 months ago. Nicholas signed off on this personally? He did. Made jokes about lawyers and fine print while he initialed every page. Catherine countersigned the implementation memo. I have copies of everything, backed up with full metadata showing exactly when each document was created, reviewed, and approved. Jennifer picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Patricia, I need you in my office immediately. Bring the executive compensation files and the Q4 equity schedules." She hung up and turned back to me. "Christopher, you understand what this means, don't you? They didn't just make a personnel mistake. They triggered a financial obligation that's going to cost them significantly more than the bonus they were trying to avoid paying." I knew exactly what it meant. The base equity bonus was $4 million, but Clause 11C included multipliers for wrongful termination, acceleration penalties for breaking contractual obligations, and damage provisions for what the legal world calls constructive dismissal. When you added it all up, Nicholas's brilliant cost-saving measure was going to cost Pinnacle approximately $6.8 million. "There's something else," Jennifer said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "If this was premeditated, and the timing suggests it was, we're looking at potential bad faith termination. That opens them up to additional damages, possibly punitive." Patricia Goldman arrived with an armload of files, her usual corporate smile fading when she saw the serious expressions in the room. As the head of executive compensation, she'd been the one to process my original bonus authorization. She knew exactly what was at stake. "Patricia," Jennifer said, "I need you to run the numbers on Clause 11C activation for Christopher's equity package. Full acceleration, compensatory multipliers, the works." Patricia's face went pale as she opened the files and began calculating. I watched her work, remembering all the times we'd collaborated on complex compensation structures, all the late nights spent ensuring every detail was properly documented. She'd been one of the few people who'd actually read my contract thoroughly when it was initially processed. "Jennifer," Patricia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "the total exposure is $6.8 million. That's before any punitive damages or legal fees." The room fell silent. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the harbor where cargo ships moved with purposeful precision, following routes planned weeks in advance, just like the route I'd planned for exactly this scenario. "They'll claim it was a legitimate restructuring," Jennifer said, thinking out loud. "They can try," I replied, "but I have documentation showing this decision was made specifically to avoid the bonus payout." Nicholas sent an email to Catherine 3 weeks ago discussing cost optimization opportunities around equity vesting dates. Jennifer's eyes sharpened. "You have that email?" I smiled for the first time all day. "I have everything." By Monday morning, the phones were ringing. Jennifer had spent the weekend reviewing every document, every email, every meeting note related to my termination. She'd also run comprehensive financial projections with Patricia's team, calculating not just the immediate payout but the potential legal exposure if this went public. The results weren't pretty for Pinnacle. Nicholas had called an emergency executive meeting for 8 a.m. sharp. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I didn't need to be there. I knew exactly what was happening in conference room 6A, the same room where I'd presented the Morrison deal strategy 2 years ago. Jennifer was explaining to a room full of executives that their cost-cutting measure had just become the most expensive personnel decision in company history. I was sitting in a coffee shop across the street from Pinnacle's headquarters, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as people hurried to work. My phone had been buzzing since 7 a.m. with calls from colleagues who'd heard rumors over the weekend. Word travels fast in the financial district, especially when it involves spectacular corporate miscalculations. The first call came at 9:15 a.m. Patrick Goldman, one of the independent board directors and someone I'd worked with on several major acquisitions. Patrick was old school, understood that business was built on relationships and trust, not MBA buzzwords and quarterly optimization schemes. "Chris," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just learned some very bad news, "I think we need to talk." "I'm listening." "This clause, this whole situation, the board is going to have serious questions about executive decision-making and risk management protocols. I'm sure they are. Jennifer says you documented everything, meeting transcripts, email trails, approval, workflows, even Nicholas's communications about timing the termination to avoid bonus payments." "I did." I took a sip of my coffee, watching a group of Pinnacle executives hurrying into the building looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Patrick, I spent 15 years building relationships with clients, closing deals, generating revenue for this company. I wrote that clause as insurance against exactly what happened Friday morning." Nicholas decided to test it without reading the fine print. There was a long pause. "The financial exposure is significant. The base bonus was $4 million. With accelerated vesting, compensatory damages, and bad faith termination penalties, we're looking at $6.8 million. That's before legal fees or any additional damages if this becomes a public relations nightmare." Jesus. Patrick's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Nicholas thought he was saving money. Nicholas thought a lot of things. Most of them were wrong. The call ended with Patrick promising to address this situation appropriately with the board. Corporate speak for heads are going to roll. By Tuesday afternoon, the damage was spreading like wildfire through the company's executive ranks. Catherine Morrison had submitted her resignation Tuesday morning, citing personal reasons and a desire to pursue new opportunities. The corporate communications team was working overtime to craft statements that wouldn't attract regulatory attention or shareholder lawsuits. Nicholas was conspicuously absent from his usual haunts. No appearances at client meetings, no strategic planning sessions, no thought leadership presentations. Word through the corporate grapevine was that he'd been advised to maintain a low profile while the board conducted their review of recent personnel decisions. Wednesday brought the settlement offer, a formal letter delivered by Jennifer herself, not sent through corporate channels or handled by intermediaries. She wanted to discuss terms personally, face-to-face, professional to professional. We met at a neutral location, a private club downtown where neither of us would run into Pinnacle employees or clients. Jennifer looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from spending 72 hours trying to minimize corporate disasters while managing executive egos and board expectations. "Christopher," she said, sliding a formal settlement document across the mahogany table, "the board has authorized full payment under Clause 11C, $6.8 million, plus continuation of benefits, plus a comprehensive mutual non-disclosure agreement." I scanned the document carefully. Everything was there: full equity acceleration, compensatory damages, even coverage of my legal consultation fees. The NDA was standard corporate language, protecting both sides from public disclosure while ensuring confidentiality around internal processes. "They want this resolved quickly and quietly," Jennifer continued. "No congressional hearings, no shareholder derivative suits, no media, investigations into corporate governance practices." Understood. I signed the papers without hesitation. This had never been about public vindication or corporate revenge. It had been about professional respect and contractual obligations. They'd failed to honor both. "There's something else," Jennifer said as I finished signing. "Westbridge Capital Management has been asking questions about your availability. Apparently, your reputation for strategic thinking and risk management has attracted some attention in the industry." Westbridge. I'd known their senior partners for years, had even been approached by them twice in the past for senior positions. The Pinnacle situation, handled with precision and discretion, had apparently enhanced my standing rather than damaged it. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office at Westbridge Capital, 42nd floor, corner suite, with a view that made Pinnacle's harbor outlook seem quaint. Senior partner, Strategic Development Division. My own team, my own client portfolio, and equity terms that made my old contract look like an internship stipend. The settlement had cleared that morning. $6.8 million deposited into accounts I'd established specifically for this purpose. Sarah and I had celebrated quietly over dinner at home, finally able to discuss the financial security that would let us consider early retirement, maybe travel to places we'd only dreamed about during those 70-hour work weeks. Nicholas Porter lasted another 6 weeks at Pinnacle before being reassigned to advisory responsibilities, corporate euphemism for exile to a corner office with no budget and no authority. Catherine's replacement implemented new protocols requiring legal review of all executive terminations involving equity compensation. And Robert Porter Sr. came out of semi-retirement to provide strategic guidance during this transitional period. Sometimes people ask me if I planned it all from the beginning. The truth is, I planned for the possibility from the beginning. There's a difference. In corporate America, you can't predict every knife aimed at your back, but you can make sure you're wearing proper armor. Clause 11C was that armor, carefully crafted, professionally implemented, and thoroughly documented. When Nicholas decided to test it, he learned that experience and preparation will always triumph over arrogance and shortcuts. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just being better prepared than everyone else in the room and letting incompetence destroy itself. The coffee shop where I spent that Monday morning is still there, across from Pinnacle's offices. Sometimes I stop by when I'm in the neighborhood watching new executives make the same mistakes that destroyed their predecessors. But that's not my problem anymore. I've got new deals to close, new strategies to develop, and new armor to build for whatever comes next, because in this business there's always a next time, and I'll be ready.